What's up, guys? Doug Polk here, and today we're going to be breaking down an epic hand that happened at Lodge Card Club heads up in a big tournament. Let's go ahead and jump into the action. Our hand begins at 20k, 40k blinds, 55 big blinds deep in the Lodge Super September 100k guarantee prize pool, a tournament that we managed to cover, guys. And if you know anything about the Lodge Card Club, we are known for covering large events. For example, we had this dandy earlier this year where on a critical day of registration in our $2 million guarantee tournament, we showed up to the parking lot being repaved. Who needs parking at a poker room? We needed it. We needed it badly. But despite a $400,000 overlay, that didn't stop us from also overlaying the Rounders Cup in October. And then a nice little $125,000 of overlay / giving out seats in our 250k last week. So basically we are overlaying a lot, and we have a $1 million tournament going on right now where we are on pace to fucking overlay this fuck tournaments. Fuck tournaments. I've always fucking hated tournaments. Be like, oh, you won 3 bracelets. Who gives a fuck? Where was I? Come on down to Lodge Card Club, where we have the $1 million Mayhem tournament. That's right, Mayhem at the Lodge. For just $1,200, you too can get a piece of the action, $1 million guaranteed. And you're going to have to run hot and or hope I'm not at your table, because if I'm there, I'm trying to stack you to save my business. Oh yeah, we're reviewing a hand, aren't we? Let's get back into the action. Our hand begins at 20k, 40k, and we are in for a doozy for this one. The action beginning with Andrew Moreno on the button here with Queen Jack offsuit. As you get into these shorter stacks, I can see some arguments for just raising or calling. As you're 100 big blinds deep or more, you don't really lose any value by raising all your hands. At 55 big blinds, still probably pretty close. I'm sure some hands would like to start to limp here. I do think that Queen Jack is actually a pretty nice limp candidate, because if you limp, you can easily call raise, where if you raise and they 3-bet, it's a little bit more debatable. You're going to have to raise call most likely, depending on the size. So I don't mind raise. I don't mind limp. Both seem like they are in play. One note I'll say, if you're heads up in a tournament near the end, you should be visualizing before the hand, are you playing limps or not? Because that should also change what you would respond to different raises. Anyway, that's a lot for just one preflop action. Action now over to Colin. My man's got the Jack 3 offsuit and some sweet shades. Watch out there, Colin. I can almost see your cards. Looks down. What's he going to do? He's going to put in the call. Now, versus a 2.5x here, Jack 3 is unfortunately just a fold. But when you take it to the streets, you take it to the streets. I'll see you guys on the flop. The flop comes 10-6-4, 2 hearts, and as all great hands begin, neither player has jack shit. I guess to be fair, Andrew does have 2 overs and a heart. Not a terrible hand, but both players are playing high cards on the flop with 0 draws. Colin checks it over, and now for Andrew, a bit of an interesting spot here with 2 over cards. These situations, the first thing you want to think about is, what size do I want to use? This board has a lot going on. I could see an argument for a very small size. I could see an argument for a middling size. Typically speaking, boards that are like 8-7 deuce will like a big size, but boards that are like 10-3 deuce will like a small size. We're getting pretty nerdy, so I'll save you the details. For Andrew, he could decide to bet or check with this hand. If you do bet, you get to barrel a lot of runouts, which is nice. You also can check back and try and play for some showdown value / pot control. And if you do get check raised, this hand really hates to see it. Anyway, Andrew does decide to go for a very healthy size bet here, 3/4 pot on the flop, 180k with the Queen Jack. Don't mind this. I probably prefer slightly smaller, but I can see the logic in the bet size. Over to Colin now with Jack 3. My man Colin, look. Let me drop some truth on you for a moment. If you're going to be one of those guys that wants to play Jack 3 offsuit versus a raise, you can't get in there and check fold. You do that, you're going to get killed. My man Colin came to play, has a sweet pair of shades on, and he's check raising this flop. Not because of math or nerds or science, but for the love of the game. You should fold though. But regardless, if you're going to play Jack 3, you got to be ready to make some moves. And he does, making it $530,000. Sorry, 530,000 chips to go on the flop. Back over to Andrew. Really tough spot with Queen Jack. And this is one of the reasons why this hand doesn't love c-betting, although I'm sure it does some of both. When you get check raised here, it's really pretty awkward because you have a good amount of equity. You're ahead of some draws. If your opponent has a hand like a 10, you're in decent shape. And so you really don't want to be folding here, especially when you could turn open ender on a king, on a 9. If a heart comes, you have a flush draw. So the stacks are also going to be kind of weird here if you call the check raise. It's about 1.5x pot behind or so. So this is one of the reasons why checking this hand is pretty good in the flop. Also worth noting, versus the bigger flop bet size, there's less check raising that happens. So this should happen less often, but we don't have to get too far in the weeds on that. Anyway, the point is, what do you do versus Queen Jack facing the check raise? I would probably call here. There's a lot of good stuff that can happen. So you only have to call 350K to win a pot that will be 1.3 million. So you need something like 27%-ish equity or so. If your opponent has a weak 10 or ace 10 or king 10, you're almost getting the direct odds with your hand versus hands like that. And then when you're up against the draws, obviously you're in the lead. The way this hand plays in the turn is okay. If you hit a queen or a jack, you're just calling down and you feel pretty good about it. So those runouts are good. And that'll happen about 1/5, 1/4, 1/5 at the time. If you turn a draw, though, it does kind of suck because on a 9, if you face, for example, a jam, you're going to have to fold this really strong draw. Same thing on a king. Same thing on a heart. So all in all, I lean call. I wouldn't hate a fold, but let's be honest. If you bet this on the flop, you're not going anywhere. And neither is Andrew. He makes the call and we take a turn. The turn is a board pairing 4, and we actually have about 1.25x pot, not 1.5. So we have roughly just about pot left here. And this is a very awkward card. Typically speaking, when the out of position player check raises and gets called and the board pairs, it's really not a good card for the check raiser. The reason is simple. When you check raise, you're saying I either have a very strong hand or I'm bluffing. So when the board pairs, there are a lot less strong hands now because of card removal effects. And all of the draws have a lot less equity because if they hit, sometimes they get stacked by boats. So when the board pairs, you'll see a lot of players, you'll see a lot of solvers. They do tons of checking. There are some spots where checking your range is good. There are some spots where you do some small betting and some check and mainly check. But regardless, you're going to want to slow down on these types of cards because frankly, you just don't have that many good hands and the opener still has tons of them. So in this spot, Colin, he's not going to play too crazy here. He's going to slow it down. The story he's been trying to tell has been caught. It's time to throw in the discipline check fold. Now, once again, over to Andrew. And this is what's so great about this hand for Andrew. I can see good arguments on every street. That's what makes good poker hands, in my opinion, to analyze. This guy could have gone in 2 directions on every single preflop or every single decision in this entire hand. And the turn is no different. So when Colin checks, I actually really like a bet here from Andrew. I can see the logic in checking. If you check, you're still beating all of the draws. You get to realize your equity. You make sure if you would hit a queen or a jack, you get a chance to stack him. You don't fall into a trap if he's check raising and then trapping you with a good hand. But the reason that I lean more towards a bet here is I think I'd want to play 2-street Geo, which means I want to bet about the same size on the turn that I want to bet on the river. And when I have a good hand, I'm going to mainly want to bet. Now, there are some very strong hands I would trap. If I did bet a 4 and got check raised and I called, if I have like 4x of hearts, or if I have a boat, or if I have maybe some strong 4s occasionally, those hands can check. But if I have a hand like jacks, queens, kings, ace 10, king 10, queen 10, anything like that, I'm going to want to just bet here and I'm going to want to try and jam the river. And so if I check back the turn, I'm giving a bunch of hands a chance to realize their equity on a card that is very good for me. So this strikes me as a position where you should be doing a good portion of betting. And one of the nice things about Queen Jack, if I bet and I get jammed on, I'm pretty okay bet folding. I don't feel that bad about it. Whereas I would not want to take that line if I have like 7-5 suited, or if I have a heart draw. With those hands, I'd prefer to check, try to hit my equity, and then play the river. This hand, I'm much more okay betting. And I also unblock a lot of the straight draws that can bluff, which means I have Queen Jack. I don't have a 9, an 8, a 7, a 5. I have none of those cards. So I don't block 7-5, 8-7, 9-8, 9-7. Just keep saying draws. You get the point. So the point is, Queen Jack, overall, I prefer a bet here. I don't know what the solver solution would say. I imagine that it would prefer bet, but I don't hate the idea of checking back either. That's the line that Andrew decides to take. He checks back, and let's take a river. The river comes a king, and both players have completely bricked, but we're not done with this hand just yet. So head on down to Lodge Card Club and enjoy the 1,200. Okay, sorry. Sorry. Where were we? Oh, yeah. So river comes the offsuit king. Neither player has anything, and my man Colin decides to make a move for basically all of the chips in the tournament, and he rips it on the river, an overbet of 1.25x pot with his Jack 3. So we've not been analyzing this hand too much from Colin's perspective, because once you end up out in the wilderness, it's kind of hard to put this into ranges. I will say I don't love jamming with his hand, because you typically prefer to jam with the suits that are not on the board when it bricks. So I'd rather bluff with some club hands. I'd rather bluff with some diamond hands. I don't want to have a heart. I don't want to have a 3. I don't want to have a 5. I don't want to have a 7. So it's nice he unblocks the 7, 8, 9 cards, or the 5, 7, 8, 9. That is pretty nice. So it's not a terrible bluff candidate, but I would really prefer to have some of those hands I mentioned earlier, where I don't block those hands that might check back to realize equity. Anyway, don't hate this bluff catcher. If you're going to check raise this wide, it could make some sense to get in there. You will have a few value bets, but let's kind of walk through what hands does Colin have for value. And let's just give him the benefit of the doubt and say he's checking a ton on the turn with his good hands. Okay, well, on this stack depth, 55 big blinds, you're definitely check raising with some pretty good top pairs. But he faced a 3/4 pot flop size, so you're not really going to be check raising that often with 10-8, 10-9, Jack 10 versus that, even Queen 10 versus that. You're going to check raise some King 10 and a good chunk of Ace 10. And those hands also are not that likely to 3-bet preflop, because they don't want to get 4-bet or jammed on. So he can rep Ace 10 here. He can rep King 10 here. He could rep King X of hearts here. Oh, and by the way, if you're asking, is Ace 10 too thin? Absolutely not. In this situation, there were very few kings that Andrew bets the flop calls a raise with. It's much more likely when you have Ace 10 that Andrew has a hand like 6-7 or pocket 8s or Ace Queen or Queen Jack. So Ace 10 is a very easy value jam here on these shorter stacks. So what value hands can he have? We mentioned some already: Ace 10, King 10, King X of hearts. If he check raised King 7 of spades and was going to give up the turn and then hit a king, he's really able to jam here with Ace 10 or better. But the thing is, he doesn't have many hands below that anyway, because of how polarized he is. So Colin's basically saying I have a good 10, or I river to king, or I have one of my few hands that I want to trap with, right? Like maybe a hand like 6-4 or 10-4. Not many of those hands. And typically speaking, 10-4 offsuit, not going to call pre. So, and then pocket 6 is mainly going to re-raise pre. So this is a situation where there are not that many value bets that Colin is representing. So you do need to be careful with which hands you're going to bluff with. Okay, that's the Colin side of the equation. Over to Andrew facing this jam. It's a very interesting spot, because realistically, Colin, given that he check raised a big flop c-bet, Colin's very polarized here to the good hands I mentioned, and then of course all the bluffs, all the missed draws, all those types of hands. So if I'm in Andrew's shoes and I'm trying to think about what kind of hands I'd want to call a jam with, the most important thing is to not have a 3, 5, 7, 8, or 9. And Andrew has none of those cards, which is really good. Now, because this jam isn't really going to be queen 10, jack 10, you don't really block that much value. And then Colin won't ever have king, queen of hearts, or he'll very rarely have king, queen of hearts because that hand will mainly re-raise pre-flop. So there aren't a ton of hands that you block that are value, but you unblock all of the bluffs. So in this situation, the really nice call hands in Andrew's shoes are when you have a 10 or a 6 or a king. A king is obviously you're being value bet, so you just snap call that. A 10 blocks the value with the 10. It blocks some of the boats. A 6 is actually quite nice, guys, because then you block, if you did flat 6s, 6-4, 10-6, all that kind of stuff. So there are a good number of hands you block when you have a pair, and I would prefer those hands. So if you're thinking, you know what, I wouldn't get this crazy, it's an over bet, I can just let this one go, I think that's actually kind of reasonable. This is a very large bet. But when your opponent gets extremely polarized, you can start to call pretty light if you have good removal effects. And I do like that Andrew doesn't block any of those bluffs that I already mentioned. Now you might think, well, he has the queen of hearts. That's a really bad bluff card for Colin because then he blocks fold from Andrew. And we can just, put all of the removal stuff to the side. The removal stuff is really important, but it's only one part of poker. I think the way Andrew's probably looking at this is my opponent is extremely polarized here, and I don't block any of these bluffs. So I'm never going to just lose to ace 7. This is either jack high or 9 high or 8 high or 5 high, or this is a really strong hand. And when you're playing someone for a while, sometimes you get a good read in the way that they're playing, which is what leads Andrew to make one of the sickest calls we've seen on our show.
I call.
Makes the call. Andrew Moreno with an amazing call. He sniffed out the fact that that bet just didn't make sense.
Probably close, right?
Can you believe that call?
Thanks for watching, guys. Please go to the lodge. Please. I'd say I don't want to beg, but I've already been begging. So head on down to Lodge Card Club. No, okay. All right. I'll see you guys down there. I'll be there on Sunday. So GLHF.